Good evening, everyone. Argentina is at a turning point. Turning points in a nation's history are not moments of peace and tranquility, but moments of difficulty and conflict where everything seems uphill. They are moments when the abyss becomes so clear that change becomes an obligation and an urgency. And overcoming that difficulty occurs because those in positions of leadership have the courage to be greater than themselves, put aside their selfishness, and make sacrifices to embark together on a common path. This is how the great history of countries is written. This is not the first time that, after years of internal warfare, representatives from different corners of the political map have gathered to lay down their arms and unite around a new order. This already happened in May 1853, when 24 delegates representing the United Provinces met to approve our first constitution and thus give us a common law for the entire national territory. We had been at war for more than 40 years, first for independence, but then we had fallen into 3 endless decades of civil war, where we had slaughtered one another with sabers. We were on the brink of the abyss, on the verge of disappearing as a nation. But thanks to the vision and courage of those leaders, and the conviction of the thousands of free men who followed them, we managed to adopt a common Magna Carta, establish the foundations upon which we would build the new order, and establish ourselves as a nation. And we did so by taking as our beacon the liberal ideas of our greatest national thinker, Juan Bautista Alberti, who was born in this very city and whose remains lie a few blocks from here. That original parchment of our first constitution, with the signatures of those 24 delegates, is today displayed in the Oath Hall, watching over the act that those present here will sign. It was this patriotic gesture of those who laid down their arms to agree on a national project that kicked off an astonishing process, Argentina's eruption like a volcano, from the depths of the abyss to the heights of the heavens. That constitution gave us half a century of economic growth and development, and as a consequence of that economic development, it brought us advances in all spheres of human activity. It was, without a doubt, the golden age of our country, which placed us at the top, side by side with the great nations of the world. And at the foundation of that long process, we always had, unshakable, a set of common principles, ideas, and objectives. Today, the great Argentina we once were seems like a distant dream. After a century of gradual descent into poverty, we, as a society, have practically forgotten our prosperous past and the ideas that made it possible. Equally distant, and even impossible, has it seemed in recent years that leaders from different forces could come together to agree on a common course, as our founding fathers did. Despite having been a historic demand of Argentina's political leadership and, why not, of society as well, the possibility of sitting down at a table and establishing common guidelines across all political forces has always seemed like a pipe dream in recent decades. That's why I want to thank everyone present for gathering here, at the historic house of our independence. After decades of vacillating between antagonistic projects that have made us increasingly poorer, we gather today to renew our patriotic vows and sign what we have called the May Pact. That's why I want to thank the members of the national government, the 18 governors who are with us today, the leaders, deputies, and senators from different parties, blocs, and districts, the former presidents, the representatives of the various economic sectors, the leaders of the armed forces, and everyone else who is here. Despite having been at odds in the past or having defended ideas different from those we subscribe to today in this pact, you have the generosity to attend this meeting, which constitutes an act of greatness and, without a doubt, of love for the country. Because you are heeding the call of the Argentine people, who listened to us from their homes and who last year demanded a profound change of direction from the political leadership. That this is possible today in Argentina, after so much division, is undoubtedly the symbol of a change of era. We do not look back, we do not hold grudges. We believe that the only thing politics should do is discuss ideas and bring those ideas to reality. Not to challenge the adversary for personal reasons, persecute them for thinking differently, or live in a permanent inquisition. And we believe, above all, that the challenge Argentina faces today is too great and the promise of a better future too valuable to allow pettiness or squabbles of the past to cloud this path. However, there are many political, social, and union leaders who are not here today for this fundamental act. In some cases, it's because their ideological blinders make them unaware of the root of Argentina's failure. In others, it's out of fear or shame for having persisted in error for so long. And unfortunately, in many cases, it's because they stubbornly refuse to give up the privileges the old order granted them. It's no coincidence that among the latter are those who have tried, and continue to try daily, to boycott this government and conspire to help it fail. They are addicted to the system because their personal interests are diametrically opposed to those of the common people, and they know, even if they don't admit it, that they are progressing at the expense of the Argentine people as a whole. However, we are convinced that even those who today ignore the demands of society, for whatever reason, can return to the Argentine path in the future and find redemption. You will find us here defending the same ideas we reaffirm today, and we will welcome you with open arms. Every person is capable of redemption, and we will not reject anyone who wants to contribute to building the change the country so desperately needs. No one, no matter what party they come from, who they've been with, where they've been a member, or what they've done, as long as they've acted within the law. The only thing that matters is that they embrace and want to contribute, as all of us here today do, to the fundamental pillars upon which we will build the new Argentina. On July 9, 1816, the signing of the Declaration of Independence marked the end of the revolution and the beginning of a new order, the United Provinces of the Rio de la Plata, now independent from the Spanish metropolis and dedicated to governing ourselves. On July 9, 2024, with the signing of this May Act, with representatives from all sectors of politics and society, we also announced the kickoff of a new order for our country. Building the prosperous and thriving country we want will take time and titanic efforts from everyone present and from society as a whole. But if we have a clear vision of the direction and unite around a set of non-negotiable principles and objectives, we will reach our destination sooner rather than later. That's why we're here today, to establish among ourselves and with society a gentleman's agreement around these pillars, and to say to all good Argentines who demanded a change of course with their vote that a different Argentina is impossible by doing the same old thing. That's why we signed this pact, the first point of which establishes the inviolability of private property. That's why we, those present, sign here a document of 10 unwavering concepts, the first of which is a commitment to the inviolability of private property. Private property is the first and most basic institution of our society. The very freedom of each individual depends on the inviolability of the first property of all, which is the ownership one has over one's own body and will. Everyone knows how much it costs to achieve what they have, how much effort, how much sweat, how much sacrifice, and above all, how much freedom was invested to achieve it. Every choice one makes entails thousands of sacrifices. That's why when politicians confiscate the fruits of an individual's labor through taxes, they are confiscating their time, their sacrifice, and their freedom. Furthermore, the defense of property is not only a right, but also a formula for economic growth. Julio Argentino Roca once said that business knows better than the government what is best for it. True politics, then, consists in giving it the broadest freedom. That is, Argentines know better what to do with their property than the government. They don't need a bureaucrat to tell them what to produce, with whom to trade, how much they can earn, who to work with, or who to hire. And in the free disposition of that property by each individual, everyone ends up better off. The freer a people are, the richer they become. It's as simple as that. Therefore, in line with this mandate, the government will pursue an aggressive deregulation agenda in all spheres of economic activity. Respecting the sanctity of private property confirms to Argentines that they are the masters of their own lives and their own destinies. In short, they are adults, and in the exercise of their capacity, they can and should choose for themselves and assume the responsibility that this entails. If the state decides on every aspect of an individual's life and has the right to claim property, the individual does not recognize himself as the owner of his own life and, consequently, is not responsible for his own actions. 2. Fiscal balance is non-negotiable. We also sign here a non-negotiable commitment to the fiscal commitment. We need to agree that the chronic fiscal deficit is the serpent's egg of Argentina's decline, because it is the ultimate source of all the problems our economy has had in the last 100 years. Debt, suffocating fiscal pressure, monetary issuance, and inflation are nothing more than symptoms, a consequence of compulsive public spending without support or financing. Therefore, what we are assuming is nothing less than a non-negotiable commitment to common sense. You can't spend more than you earn, and you can't force those who will pay taxes in the future to solve the waste of the present. Sooner or later, debt or issuance to solve public deficits ends up being paid for with an inflationary tax, which is the worst of all because it affects those with the least the most, and for me, it carries a moral burden. These are basic, unalterable laws of economics. They are unobjectionable mathematics. When we obeyed these principles as a nation, we did so well in such a short time that we were soon the envy of the entire world. But when, in a vicious pattern of fatal arrogance, the political class believed it could invent the wheel and ignore these basic laws of economics, it plunged us into misery for a century, and we ended up in the profound abyss we find ourselves in today. Well, we are not gods, we are just men. We don't write the rules, we can only follow them. That's why, from now on, economic shamanism is over. We must do what has proven to work worldwide and abandon the recipes that failed. Now, if we fulfill this commitment, that doesn't mean we'll never have economic setbacks. No one can predict or promise that. Countries that function well also have problems. But what I do promise you is that we will live in a country without inflation for the rest of our days. And I want to take a second to make you understand what this means. Because we've lived under an inflationary regime for so many years that we've become accustomed to it. Those under 25 probably don't even remember what it's like to live without inflation. Living harassed by inflation is living in the prison of the eternal present, where it becomes impossible to look ahead, calculate our expenses, and plan our future. It negates the possibility of a personal project, a family project, or an economic project. Therefore, restoring fiscal balance and turning it into a commandment that will outlive this government and endure for many more is, for us, an issue in which human dignity itself is at stake. Third, public spending of around 25 points of GDP. We also commit to this agreement to reduce public spending to historical levels of around 25% of the gross domestic product. Our country has natural resources and a hyper-talented and hard-working human capital, but it doesn't prosper because the private sector, businesses, workers, and entrepreneurs are burdened with more than 40 points of GDP in state spending, which we are reducing with great effort. This means that for every $10 that Argentines earn with the sweat of their brow, more than 4 are consumed by national, provincial, and municipal governments. And since magic doesn't exist, this excessive spending can only be financed with taxes that suffocate our economy, with inflation that crushes wages and makes economic calculation impossible, or with debt, which is imposed on future generations. Every additional point of GDP that politicians add to state spending is a burden on the private sector. It is a direct extraction of wealth and opportunities for every company that wants to invest, progress, and provide jobs. It's a direct reduction in the income of Argentine families, whether in the form of a tax on the goods they consume or higher inflation. It's suffocating our rural areas with taxes that don't exist anywhere else in the world. It's blocking the full development of our productive interior. It's preventing entrepreneurs from scaling their projects and becoming big business owners. Excessive public spending is at the heart of all our ills. As we've been insisting for years, we face problems of biblical magnitude, problems that require the efforts of all sectors. Drastically reducing the state's weight in our economy is our most important and most difficult mission. That is why we are calling for this pact, so that all of us with responsibility for this matter can do our part to ensure our country's prosperity. 44% of our country's state spending corresponds to the provinces and municipalities. For every national state employee, there are 5 provincial employees. Achieving a reasonable state weight of 25 percentage points of GDP requires all levels of government to do their part. This will benefit everyone, because the prosperity of the country, of each of its provinces and municipalities, is inversely proportional to the size of the state. We at the national state have already demonstrated our commitment, having made the largest reduction in public spending in the history of the national state in just 8 months. The signatories here pledge to do their part in their respective districts. A state that serves society and not politicians must have, in addition to a reasonable weight, clear functions. We insist on reducing the state's weight by 15 percentage points. Not only because this was the size it had during our most prosperous era, but because with a consolidated spending of 25 percentage points, the only functions the state must fulfill can be fulfilled. Enforcing the law and respecting private property, suppressing and punishing crime in all its forms, ensuring the integrity of the national territory with well-respected and equipped armed forces, and ensuring Argentines access to education and healthcare. A small state with limited and clear functions is worth more than a giant state that squanders Argentines' resources on tasks that do not correspond to it, benefits a few, and blocks our country's prosperity. Fourth, education. We also sign here the commitment to useful and modern early primary and secondary education, with full literacy and no dropouts. Because we understand that Argentina has been experiencing an undeniable educational crisis for a long time. And we recognize today that the heart of the crisis lies in our failure as a country to properly teach our students how to read and write. Today, half of primary school students do not achieve the reading comprehension level appropriate for their age. For 6th graders, that figure reaches 70%, meaning that today, 7 out of 10 Argentine children do not understand the texts they read. And all this happened under the noses of the political leadership. While mayors and parliamentary blocs haggled over which municipality would get the funds to build a new university, we have focused solely on higher education for decades. And while we looked the other way, illiteracy crept in through the cracks at the first levels of education. We must understand that proper literacy and the guarantee of basic skills for primary school students are the necessary condition that makes any type of subsequent learning possible. If we cannot guarantee this, all subsequent efforts in a student's educational journey are conditioned from the start. We cannot be surprised by the record dropout rates we have today. That's why this commitment is, above all, one that the national government and the provincial governments must make together to face the problem head-on and raise the bar. And to recover the spirit of demanding teachers, which is so necessary. Know that you will have the national state and the resources and support of the literacy plan we presented this week to jointly pursue this goal. But the problem in education doesn't end with literacy, with improving basic education. We have an educational system that is disconnected from the economic needs of our society. Because we have university degrees that are too long, because we have prioritized increasing the university offering over tertiary offerings. Because we graduate an exaggerated number of lawyers and accountants, who are only sued because in Argentina there are too many lawsuits, too much paperwork, and too many taxes. And because we have a large number of programs for which the only possible employer is the state, directly or indirectly, performing functions it shouldn't perform. And most complicated of all, because the status quo in teacher training institutions and faculty is challenging the basic precepts of the system of social cooperation in which we live, which is capitalism and liberal democracy. The latter is simply collective suicide. How can it be the norm in the country's secondary schools and universities to instill that capitalism is evil? The primary goal of the educational system must be to integrate students into society according to its standards. We ignored illiteracy for decades. And here we are today in a situation incompatible with the educational tradition of our country, which was the first in the world to end illiteracy. We cannot ignore the other problems of the educational system. We must address them before it's too late. That's why I'm speaking to you here today about shifting to a useful and modern education. Useful for young people, so that they have the tools to enter and develop in the labor market and in society in general. And that's why I urge the political leadership and civil society to focus on rebuilding the foundation of the educational edifice and the human development of Argentines, the school. Because no edifice will last if its foundations are broken. Fifth, tax reform. We also sign here the commitment to implement a tax reform that reduces tax burdens, simplifies the lives of Argentines, and promotes trade. Our tax system is suffocating, labyrinthine, and unstable. Argentina must stop being a fiscal hell for those who work, strive, and invest. Our country has an explicit tax burden that exceeds 30% of GDP. Over the past 15 years, it has grown steadily, and, not coincidentally, during this same period, we were the country with the lowest growth in Latin America. To reverse this, reducing the state's influence on the economy must be accompanied by a significant reduction in the tax burden. The problem with this system doesn't end here. In addition to its weight, there is its complexity. Today, Argentines are subject to more than 150 taxes, including national, provincial, and municipal taxes. This is a hidden cost borne by businesses and individuals. In addition to reducing the tax burden, we must simplify it. This requires the commitment of provincial and municipal governments. Argentines deserve to be free. They deserve to dedicate their time and resources to unleashing all their creativity and talent to creating wealth, not to filling out forms and paying dozens of incomprehensible taxes. Finally, achieving a stable tax system is essential. A capitalist economy is based on the ability to perform economic calculations, allowing economic agents to infer what their income and expenses will be in the future. In Argentina, this has become impossible, not only because of inflation, but also because of the voracious fiscal policy, which has constantly created taxes to cover unnecessary expenses. Many of these, such as the check tax or the personal asset tax, were temporary. but have been draining the pockets of those who pay them for more than 2 decades. We need the commitment of all parties to achieve a tax system that does not stifle private activity, that is simple, and that endures over time. Sixth, rediscussion of federal revenue sharing. We also signed the commitment here to rediscuss federal tax sharing, to permanently end the extortionate model that the provinces suffer. Our federalism is fraudulent, it punishes those who are fiscally responsible and productive, and it only serves to allow politicians in Buenos Aires to extort the provinces in exchange for political favors. On the one hand, we have a federal tax-sharing system that perverts all incentives for progress. Under a supposed principle of solidarity, it brings provinces that do their homework with orderly public accounts and productive economies to subsidize those who live off others. We must incentivize those who invest in the development of the private sector instead of punishing it. On the other hand, it has become customary in recent decades for politicians in Buenos Aires to distribute resources at their discretion to benefit their political allies. We have put an end to this practice, reducing these transfers to zero, but we need everyone's commitment to ensure that these practices never return. Each of our provinces has everything it needs to progress and stand on its own feet in a prosperous free market economy. They don't need a fraudulent federalism that only serves the politics of Buenos Aires. Discussing co-participation seems a daunting task at first, but never in history has a national government been more willing to return to the provinces what belongs to them than ours. We must be able to find a path to agreement on this matter. 7. Natural resources. The other commitment we signed here today, and for which we will need the will of the provinces, is the commitment to exploit the natural resources God has given us. God blessed our land with an enormous wealth of natural resources. He gave us the opportunity for Argentines in every corner of the country to create wealth and live their lives with dignity. But politicians have listened more to the demands of noisy minorities and environmental organizations funded by foreign millionaires than to the Argentine people's need for prosperity. We have come to change that, to leave behind the do-gooder demagoguery that condemns millions of Argentines to misery for the approval of a wealthy few. Nature should serve human beings and their well-being, not the other way around. Environmental problems must put the individual at the center. That's why the main environmental problem we face is extreme poverty, and this can only be solved if we take advantage of our resources. We have reached the point of ridiculousness of sharing the Andes with Chile and not producing copper. While they export more than $50 billion a year in this mineral, more than double what we export in soybeans. We have also reached the point of ridiculousness of hindering the exploitation of our maritime resources, one of our most abundant resources, only to have them appropriated by foreign powers. A commitment to exploiting our natural resources is a commitment to the real needs of our country, to ending poverty and providing growth opportunities for all Argentines in every corner of the country. Labor reform. Of course, none of this will be possible without advancing a modern labor reform that promotes formal employment. On this issue, there can be no doubt. The labor regime that has prevailed in Argentina for 50 years is obsolete and harmful. For the world of work we have today, there is no room for continuing to cling to this model. When the world has changed, and especially when Argentina has changed, and in the wrong direction, dragged to the bottom of the sea by the anchor that is the current labor system. It is a regime with outdated regulations that make it almost impossible to hire someone formally. That's why 2 out of every 10 people of working age have a formal job. And this figure has practically remained unchanged for 10 years. At the same time, the only thing that has grown in Argentina in the last 10 years was public employment, which in provincial governments grew by 35% from 2011 to the present. We've been going backwards for decades, and political and union leaders have tried to hide the effects. They've preferred to let the economy collapse and the formal labor market disappear rather than engage in discussions about how to change it. It must be understood that current labor legislation was designed for a country that had eliminated poverty and had no unemployment. This country no longer exists. We are a poor country, with the majority of the population working in precarious conditions. We need to create jobs, quality formal jobs, and for that, it's essential to generate wealth. It's time to recognize that sweeping the problem under the rug doesn't make it go away, it only makes it worse. It's time to accept that the best thing for a worker is an entrepreneur, and that to ensure there are more workers and better quality jobs, there must be more businesses. It's time to accept that hiring must be profitable for companies, not an act of solidarity. And it's time to accept that it must be possible for companies to fire without facing a hellish lawsuit, because with the labor laws we have, we are harming companies, but even more so, workers. Ninth, pension reform. We cannot advance labor reform without a profound reform of the pension system, which makes the system sustainable and guarantees respect for those who have contributed. The Argentine pension and retirement system is broken and has an incentive design that makes it unsustainable and immoral. In addition to demographic factors such as the aging population, or the fact that life expectancy has fallen from 64 to 76 years in 5 decades, there is an absolutely perverse retirement system. For every retiree, there are only 1.8 active workers, when in reality, 4 are needed. This is no coincidence. This is because we have labor laws that encourage informality and a pension system that steals from those who contributed and gives to those who didn't. This removes any incentive to contribute to the system. We need a pension system that respects the contributions and savings of a lifetime. It perverts the morale of a country that values those who have strived, worked, and contributed their entire lives equally as those who haven't. This applies to pensions, education, taxes, and federal government. In Argentina, the incentives are reversed. Those who don't act are rewarded and those who do are punished. Those who don't comply benefit, while those who comply are harmed. This perverse logic, which cuts across all aspects of social life, must end. 10th, openness and global trade. Finally, we also sign here the commitment to openness to international trade, so that Argentina can become a player in the global market. Our economy is the 3rd most closed on the planet, surpassed only by Sudan and Ethiopia. This is a hindrance to the progress and well-being of all Argentines. Politics has tried to convince us, demagogically, that closing the economy was meant to protect Argentines. Nothing as false as this has ever been said. A closed economy only serves to protect a few friends of those in power so they can sell more expensive and lower-quality products to the 47 million Argentines. A closed economy makes it impossible for thousands of Argentine companies, entrepreneurs, and professionals to sell their goods and services abroad. This blocks the possibility of thousands of well-paying jobs in our country. Unlike those who have governed before, we believe in Argentina's potential to be a player in the global market. We believe that our compatriots have the capacity and creativity to offer high-quality goods that can compete and conquer the best markets in the world. Free trade, so vilified in Argentina in recent decades, is the engine of global progress. There is no possibility of growth if we do not open ourselves to trade. Argentina must stop turning its back on the world. We must be a player in global trade in the coming decades. We have everything to do so. Finally, these 10 ideas we have briefly outlined are the 10 pillars upon which we will rebuild the edifice of our nation. But these 10 ideas cannot remain mere rhetoric. We did not come here to build a narrative. We came here to build a nation. For this reason, we have decided to create the May Council, which will be tasked with translating each of these paragraphs into effective legislation that we will send to Congress. We hope that, with the support of all Argentine economic stakeholders, we can translate the principles outlined here into legislative reforms. A few months ago, during the celebration of May 25th, I spoke about how Argentina's great history is marked by the passing of generations of patriots. These are the generations we all learned about in textbooks when we were children, the May generation, which rebelled against the yoke of a corrupt and immoral regime that parasitized the lives of Argentines to pay taxes to the crown, the generation of 37, of Alberti and Sarmiento, which for the first time conceived the country and wrote down the ideas and principles according to which it would develop, the generation of 80, which translated those ideas into a political project of prosperity and made Argentina a power admired throughout the world. We have all heard about those men who make up the great pantheon of heroes of our homeland. We remember them as superior, divine beings, made of a different kind of clay than the rest of us mortals. But deep down, they were men of flesh and blood. They had, as the Holy Scriptures say and as King Solomon asked the Creator, wisdom to distinguish good from evil, courage to choose it, and also the temperance to stay on the path even when circumstances seemed too adverse at the time. And these qualities, seen from the lens of the present, seem divine because they are rare. But they are human, they are possible, and they can be embodied by each of us. Today, after having tried every experiment there was for 100 years in a row and after having touched the depths of the abyss as a country, the vast majority of Argentines are aware that straying has cost us dearly. And when society demands profound change and the drums of history once again beat, it is once again up to men, not divine beings, but mere men and women, to live up to what history demands. Therefore, we not only have the historic opportunity, but also the obligation to heed that call, the obligation to follow the moral and civic example of those illustrious Argentines, the obligation to take up that gauntlet together and once again be a generation of patriots, to dare to do what history demands. Even if the cost of doing so means renouncing our reputation or personal interests, and to once again embrace, for the first time in 100 years, the ideas embraced by our national heroes. The ideas that transformed a country from barbarians into a world power in a matter of a few decades, which are also the ideas that made the West the most impressive civilizing feat in the history of humanity and which I like to call the ideas of freedom. I know that for some it seems like an impossible task. I know that many Argentines are tired and feel that we have expended too much effort in the service of nothing in recent years, and that trying to get ahead in Argentina sometimes feels like carrying a Sisyphus's boulder. But I tell you, we know that a different Argentina is impossible by doing the same old thing, and we will not stop until we root out the ills that afflict our country. We are confident that if we do this together, we will succeed, because we have done it in the past and we can do it again. Because we are not just any people, we are Argentina. And because victory on the battlefield does not depend on the number of soldiers, but on the forces that come from heaven. Long live the homeland and long live freedom, damn it. Long live freedom, damn it. Long live freedom, damn it. Thank you all very much. Thank you for such greatness. Thank you for this patriotic gesture. Thank you very much.